For instance, Tim Walz is being attacked as a communist, as a socialist. Why? Because he wanted hungry kids in Minnesota to have breakfast and lunch at school.
Joe Scarborough's a Republican. No, really. Just ask him. It's right there in his bio on the MSNBC website. This morning on his program, he tried to convince all of us that the price controls and central command of the American economy that Kamala Harris is proposing right now, and what Tim Walz sort of already set up in Minnesota, is not in any way socialist. And he would know, because if I can remind you, he's a Republican. So take it away, Joe Scarborough, the Republican. Convince us.
Is that often what's branded as far left and progressive is right in the middle of where so many Americans are. Like, for instance, Tim Walz is being attacked as a communist, as a socialist. Why? Because he wanted hungry kids in Minnesota to have breakfast and lunch at school. Kamala Harris being called a communist, a socialist, a communist, because she wants to make it easier for younger Americans to get that first house, which they cannot get now. Mm-hmm. They are shut out of the American dream that we grew up with. And so Kamala Harris is saying, let's see what we can all do together so younger Americans can get that first home. That ain't socialism. That is pragmatic politics that a lot of Americans support.
You know, Joe, you're absolutely right. Sometimes these labels get in the way of the underlying values that we all share. And sometimes, you know, we find ourselves, defending ideology as if it's just pure when we're all complicated. One minute I may sound like I'm on the far left. The next minute I might sound like T.S. Eliot, depending on what we're talking about. Right. So it's really an indication of how complex everyday ordinary people are.
Right.
And how
it's very complex. And these labels are just getting in the way, Akash. The plan to confiscate people's wealth and then hand out $25,000 to the people they choose to give it to so they can buy their first home, which, by the way, of course, increases the value of every home by $25,000 because we all know they're going to get that money from the government. But you don't want to call it socialism because that just gets in the way. Akash, are we doing this all wrong over here?
You know, to be totally clear, I do think the word socialism and communism probably gets thrown around too much. It does not get thrown around incorrectly when we talk about price controls. This has been tried and failed in every single socialist and communist regime, basically in the history of the world. I mean, progressive economists and writers of the Washington Post were writing pieces titled, "If your opponent's calling you a communist, maybe don't propose price controls." Yes. That's how obvious the connection is. And the thing is, you don't even need to get to the labels, Larry, to see what a dumb idea this is. One need only look at other places where the government has tried this. Look at higher education. Look at healthcare. Just since the year 2000, healthcare costs are up more than 160%. College education tuition is up almost 200%. What do those two things have in common? Government is subsidizing it for more and more and more people to try to make it more affordable, and instead is making things more expensive. And to Joe Scarborough's actual point, Larry, the reason the American dream is out of reach and home prices are out of reach is because of the same inflation crisis that Kamala Harris and the Democrats helped create. Labor costs are up, equipment costs are up, supplies are up, supply chains have been disrupted, trillions of pages and trillions of dollars worth of regulatory costs. I mean, they are the reason it's out of reach for people, and pouring more government dollars, more government control into it is not going to work. We've seen it fail over and over again, and this will be
thank you. I mean, it is accurate to point out that young people right now starting out don't have access to the American dream and buying their first home. But instead of actually solving the problems that are barring them from that dream, they're actually exacerbating and adding to it to make it even worse for the next generation. Jim Hansen, you're a student of history. You've seen how communism has been able to waltz in and take over countries and destroy them. But the important thing is those dictators, just like Kamala Harris, as Joe Scarborough points out, their intentions were great. They just wanted to help people, Jim.
Yeah, I'm sure if they do true communism or true socialism this time, it'll work. And I think it's fair to talk about those two things specifically because this is the most far left ticket in the history of America. Both the president and vice presidential candidate are far to the left of Bernie Sanders. Now, let's remember, Tim Walz made more than 30 trips to communist China. And upon returning, he lectured students he was teaching that the communist system is just about sharing. And then to make it even better, on the White Dudes for Harris Zoom call, Tim Walz said, one person's socialism is just another person's neighborliness. So I would agree with Kosh that it gets thrown around too much until you get to these two. They have embraced it, and now they're going to have to answer for that. And I think the answer is going to be, you guys are some flavor of commies. Woke is just the newest flavor of socialism. It's replacing class warfare with identity politics. So they are deep in that, and let's hold them to it.
Jim, before you start throwing around any stones, though, I'm pretty sure that one of the White Dudes for Harris on the Zoom call had a very similar hat and set that you're utilizing right now. May have been one of the backup singers for Journey, not sure. Sarah, you actually, I think, represent this generation Scarborough's talking about. You are having some barriers to get into the same financial lifestyle that the rest of us have been able to at your age. Do you see Joe Scarborough's point here that this is the solution you've been waiting for?
No. No. We have to keep in mind that Joe Scarborough is married to Mika. So calling him a Republican is just him cosplaying as a congressman yet again. He looks the part, but he's still spewing the same BS as everybody else on the left. And here's the thing, I really want to buy a house, but I live in DC. So if I wanted to buy a house, I'd have to move to Texas or somewhere that isn't in a metropolitan area, which isn't feasible for what I do.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to think about like what Jim was saying when it comes to Tim Walz, he's not the person you think he is. There, like, I don't know if you saw this, but on the stage last night, right before the balloon dropped, Tim Walz yanked his neurodivergent son like really hard when they're walking onto stage. It's just like, you can't trust this guy. And of course, you're going to put him in a pretty package. This is such a Democrat thing to do. Everything sounds really good until you look at the implementation. It's, you know, like, look at the Green New Deal. Everybody agrees with like bullet points that might just be the one-liners they'll see on TV. But then you look into the meat of it, the pork, and it's disgusting. You need to think about how it's going to be implemented. You need to look at the process. You need to look at who is putting together this legislation.
Yeah.
And Kamala and Tim, they're just psychopaths, dude. Like,
they're like, and these policies are economy destroying policies. We've seen it over and over and over again in every country that has tried it, whether you call it socialism, Marxism, or as Joe Scarborough just put it, just really pragmatic ideas where everybody's heart is in the right place. We just want kids to be able to eat lunches, and we want young people to be able to buy houses. I want all those things too. But I know that the solution isn't government to get those things done.